Is this car a nightmare? Is it? 5 years! For the last 5 years I've been putting videos out talking about how awesome these cars are and ultimately how reliable they are. And for a long time I felt on my own with this perspective, especially when I started this channel, because the majority of information out there about these cars for a long time was that they were terrible cars to own due to massive reliability issues. We're talking excessive rod bearing wear, spun rod bearings, broken Vanos pumps, leaving shrapnel all through your engine, SMG gearbox faults. Guys, the stuff of nightmares. I have noticed things have started to change out there now recently though, with a more positive outlook on these cars. And why? Because these cars have been around for some time now and reality hasn't played out as per all the nonsense being spewed about the E60 M5 on the internet. I've certainly noticed over the years that the negative message normally comes from two different groups: the majority that never owned, driven or even experienced one of these cars, or the ones that have owned them but unfortunately haven't been mindful of the maintenance required to keep the car in good shape, and on top of that driven them in a brutal manner, and worst of all, while the engine is cold. You want to treat one of these cars like that, it's going to be game over, buddy. And that's what I wanted to discuss in today's video, how what has the potential to be such an awesome ownership experience can turn into an absolute horror show pretty quickly if you approach the ownership like a moron. Okay, so you want to smash a Vanos pump quickly, the high pressure oil pump for your variable valve timing that lives buried deep in the bottom of your engine. Well, a good way to do that is leave the vehicle in gear while it's parked. Okay, so why is this an issue? Well, if your SMG system develops an issue, like I've talked about in previous videos, check out the link at the top of the screen. As a fail-safe, it won't let you start the car in most cases. In the rare event that this can happen, if you're away from home or away from a workshop, garage or dealership, you're going to have to get the car towed. Towing one of these cars while it's in gear is a big no-no. Why? Because if that Vanos pump gets driven or forced to rotate the wrong way, it'll wreck it. Oh, what's that? But you live in San Francisco? Well, you better make sure that handbrake is correctly adjusted for the most part. Don't park one of these cars up and leave it in gear. If you do have the oil sump off for a rod bearing job or a high pressure Vanos hose, it's worth removing the Vanos pump just to inspect the bearing race. Okay, next up, rod bearings. Okay, we get it. 90% of the information online about the E60 M5 is letting us know how terrible the rod bearings are. Alright, we get it. But what causes them to fail as such? Incorrect lubrication. Now this engine is a masterpiece. It's a phenomenal engine. Revs to 8250 RPMs, makes over 500 horsepower, naturally aspirated. With a crankshaft spinning that fast, it needs correct lubrication. So the most important factors are the oil type and the oil temperature. Make sure the engine is up to temperature before you rev the engine out. If you are revving it out from cold, you'll wreck the connecting rod bearings. Do it enough times and you'll end up spinning a bearing and damage the crankshaft. Now then, every owner has their own perspective on what oil they want to use in these engines, specifically the viscosity. And listen, I'm not interested in getting into a discussion with anyone about this, so don't start in the comment section. But I recommend sticking with a 10W60 weight, specifically for its sheer strength. I normally go with the Castrol Supercar. And moving up to the top of the engine, next we'll discuss fuel injectors. Now as these cars age, the fuel injectors can start to become worn and contaminated. What this can lead to is them not shutting off properly. They'll start to pass a bit of fuel when closed. Then what happens is when you get your E60 M5 home and shut off the engine, the fuel pressure is going to bleed off through the faulty injector and into the cylinder. This is not good. If it's a reasonable amount of fuel, it'll cause a hydrolock situation, which in most cases will bend the conrod and has the potential to damage the cylinder walls. This is a proper horror show situation and there isn't really much coming back from this. It's a replacement engine situation in most cases. Now this pretty bad situation can be mitigated with changing out the fuel injectors preventatively, probably worth doing every 100,000 miles. Now as far as the SMG gearbox goes, it's a very strong gearbox that can take a lot of hard shifting. Just look at how hard it shifts in that 6 SMG setting. But if you drive the car constantly in the 5th or 6th shift setting all the time, it will accelerate the clutch wear substantially. But just something as simple as choosing the correct setting for the correct application can extend the life of the clutch significantly. There is a misconception that the lower settings slip the clutch more, but the higher settings still apply a bit of slip while it's getting used hard, and this causes much more wear. Guys, by all means drive the car hard, it can take it, but we don't want to have to be replacing the clutch every 5 minutes if we can help it. And when the time does come to replace the clutch, make sure you replace the slave cylinder, as these have a habit of leaking. It affects the hydraulic pressure side of the SMG and it'll soak the clutch in brake fluid. Not an expensive part by any means, but not the easiest part to get at either. Alright guys, so there we have it. There's no reason whatsoever why the BMW E60 M5 should give you nightmares, so long as you approach the ownership experience with the right mindset. If you choose not to look after the car properly, then the ownership experience will turn into a nightmarish situation horror show pretty quickly. If you found the video interesting or useful, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW E60 M5 content. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.